Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lucy and in today's video I am delighted to be talking about dark romance with you. So this is a beginner's guide to dark romance and is really aimed for those people who have never read this genre before, or if you have read a few books in the genre and you're looking for new recommendations of where to go next, then this video will be perfect for you. So dark romance is really a genre that I started reading this year properly, and I'd always been a little bit wary about it because I will go into what dark romance is in a second. But usually dark romance comes with a lot of trigger warnings and a lot of very disturbing themes that go on in these books. But what I didn't expect was just how addictive and compelling all of these books actually are. So before we get started with the video, please do make sure you're subscribed and give this video a thumbs up if you do end up enjoying it. You can also follow me at Bookbell Reads across Instagram, Twitter and TikTok. I post lots of bookish content, so do follow me on there as well. So let's go into the video. Like, what is dark romance? What is it classified as? So to me, dark romance is a romance, obviously, where taboos are often brought up. It's centered around a concept or a taboo that society deems, you know, a bit grey or perhaps even very extreme and very kind of like off limits. So that to me is dark romance. If there is any kind of form of, you know, a very dark deed happening and kind of conflicted emotions and characters that are very morally dubious, to me that sums up a dark romance. I think obviously what different people consider dark romances will change with the person. So if I did read a few of these romances I read this year a few years ago, I probably would have been like, nope, can't read that, that's too much for me. But I've definitely been reading more in this area, and I guess like my tolerance for certain themes has definitely increased, and it really is kind of a different type of thrill reading a dark romance book because the boundaries of what you're used to reading are pushed. And I think if you enjoy that, if you enjoy kind of being truly shocked, then you will enjoy a dark romance. But what I always enjoy about dark romance, and especially in these recommendations that I'll go into today, is just how there is a glimmer of hope, there's a glimmer of humanity in most of these books. And there is a line that isn't crossed, and I really, really appreciate that, because I think, like, don't get me wrong, there are probably some dark romances out there that completely like glorify different topics, and I think like I am not about that. I've definitely recognized where my lines are, so do bear that in mind when you are reading, when you are kind of testing out dark romance. Just have a little think about what your boundaries are, what you're willing to read and what you're not willing to read, in accordance with your trigger warnings and content warnings. Just look those up before you read. So without further ado, I quickly want to go into why we love dark romance. And to me, I think that's really about the taboo aspect. We as a society for years enjoy something about things that are taboo, that are grotesque, that are reflecting the darkest parts of humanity, and there is a fascination in that darkness. For years, you know, even in the medieval periods and later, people would go out to executions, people would watch hangings, people would enjoy the grotesque. So there's always a fascination with the darkest, most grotesque parts of our humanity. But where I think dark romance is really having a revival and a really big moment, especially on like TikTok, is because there is something that mixes desire and romance and love that really can push us to our limits. And there are just some circumstances that, even if they are quite dark, you know, that can still be quite appealing. And I think that just reflects the complexity of us as human beings, and there's always that fascination into delving into the darker parts of your soul, your humanity. That is why I think dark romance is so popular. And now I want to go on to the book recommendations. So I'm sure you've all been waiting for this bit, but I have read some incredible dark romances in the past few months, and I must say, biggest recommendation for a YouTube channel who recommends dark romances has to go to Jessica at Peace Love Books. I get all of my recommendations from her. If it's romance, I know she'll have read it. So I would recommend checking out her channel because she is fab. Anyway, let's get on to my book recommendations because I have thoughts, I have feelings, and I need to tell you about these books. So the first book I really would like to recommend comes with every content warning under the sun. Please just look up these before you go into this book series, okay? So it is Haunting Adeline and Hunting Adeline by H.D. Carlton. So this is a stalker romance. We're going full dark romance here. This is where Adeline, our main character, who is an author, she lives in this big creepy house that was inherited by her grandparents, and she basically sees this guy staring out at her from the woods outside her house, and he ends up stalking her. And there are times when she brings a romantic partner back to her house and this stalker threatens to kill them. Like, he goes to quite extremes to have her to himself. They eventually get face to face and you learn a little bit more about this stalker. Now, the stalker is a guy called Zaid, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, so do skip forward a few seconds if you don't want to hear about his backstory. But Zaid is an interesting character because he is very morally grey in the sense of he is literally stalked Adeline and has forced himself on her and, you know, kind of forced sexual encounters onto her that at first she was very, very resistant to. And those whole scenes, I'm like, I'm not about that. Like, I really, really wish those scenes weren't in the book, but I think they do really push you to kind of just like, you know, just succumb to the book, just go with the book. But anyway, Zaid is a really complex character because what he is doing as a job, where he is trying to hunt down people who are involved in human trafficking and the sex trade, like, he is really, really moral in that sense. Like, he wants to eradicate human trafficking, slavery. He has this very pure intent of eradicating those types of evil from the world, but his means of going about that are quite intense. Like, he will torture and murder all of those people. He sees himself, he's kind of like a vigilante, I guess. Like, he is more than happy to live by his own code of morals. And I think that's what makes this book series so fascinating. So that's a little bit about Zaid, our love interest, who, don't get me wrong, I kind of like can't help but root for, like, even though he's done some awful things. And that's not excusing the awful things, but I must say the second book, Hunting Adeline, this was where I had to at times skip ahead. I had to skip certain pages entirely. I was really, really uncomfortable. There is trigger warnings galore for rape and sexual assault. Yeah. And it's quite intense. So please do like bear that in mind if you are going into this. It is, however, a completely compelling, addictive, amazing series. And when I tell you guys that I rushed through this series, like, I binge read this series so fast. I considered myself to be in a bit of a reading slump, and Haunting Adeline and Hunting Adeline pulled me right out of that. I was addicted. I needed to know how the book series was gonna end. And it's tragic, but equally I loved both books so much. I really would recommend this book. If you're looking for a book series that does not hold any punches, like, this is dark, dark stuff, but also so well written, very compelling. The love story in it is very intense, but I actually really enjoyed it. So that's enough on Haunting Adeline. The next book I really would love to recommend is probably one of the best books I've read all year. And this book is called Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman. Now, this book you probably will have heard of. It's very, very popular, but I read it for the first time this year and completely was hooked. I fell in love. It was just so tragic, so heartbreaking, but so well done. And the premise of this book is it follows our main character. She is at a birthday party with her sister and her sister's fiance at the beginning of the book. And long story short, her and her sister's fiance, who have always hated each other, like literally hate each other and always have done since childhood, they get kidnapped together and they are forced by this sick killer to be intimate with each other. And he has this weird persona where this serial killer basically enjoys seeing couples that he has kidnapped fall in love with each other through him forcing them together. So really, really sick stuff, and it really does play on like every single fear you have as a human being about being kidnapped and forced to do awful stuff. Like, it really is dark and it really takes you there. But what I'm really grateful for in this book is that it handles the sexual violence really well. Like, it doesn't glorify it, it's not really out on the page. And what this book does really, really well is the trauma kind of response. And, you know, I think it's not a spoiler to say that they do get out of that situation, both the main character and the sister's fiance. But then the second half of the book is basically them falling in love with each other. And they are questioning the whole way through, is this because of what we were forced to do together in this basement, or have we loved each other all along? And that's why we've always hated each other, because it's actually been love. So it's really complicated, but it's so brilliantly done, and you really, really feel for these people who have this complete traumatic experience, and they can only really speak to each other about it. Like, their family don't really understand, and it's really heartbreaking for them to both be so alone in this situation, apart from with each other. So the romance is really, really good. It doesn't glorify, I think, any of the violence or any of the kind of sexual assault that did happen. I think it does a really good job of showing how people cope with trauma after an incident like that, how love can develop from a situation like that. So really would recommend Still Beating. I gave it 5 stars. I was really, really impressed. So as a new convert to dark romance, that would be probably like my entry level one. I think like it's quite intense and it's quite scary and awful, but like actually most of the book is this whole like will they, won't they. Now the next book I would semi-like to recommend, semi-wouldn't like to recommend, I know that's really strange, is Punk 57 by Penelope Douglas. Now the reason why I thought I would include this book is because whilst I didn't necessarily get on with it, I know a lot of people adore this book. Now, there was enough about this book that I did love and that I was like addicted to. Like, I obviously read it and finished it so quickly. So there's a lot going for this book, but I do have some quibbles which I'll talk to you about. So this book is a bully romance, and it is about a set of pen pals. They have always written letters to each other, but they have never met in real life. And then when a new boy moves to the main character's school, she kind of has this like awful relationship with him, where he is a complete bully to her, and they are awful to each other. Like, they do really awful things to each other, but they also have a very kind of physical relationship, and they get together and they form a relationship. And it's a very toxic type of relationship. Like, don't get me wrong, it is toxic AF. It's really childish. That was one of the negatives for me, was just like, these people are literally children. Like, what are they doing? But of course, it turns out to be the guy that she has always been in love with, who she's been writing letters to the whole time. So I really like that setup, and I quite enjoy a bully romance, and like, if it's done right. What annoyed me about Punk 57 was the childishness of it. And it was written as if like they were trying really, really hard to be a cool high school teenager, but to me it just felt a bit forced. But I do actually think the darkness really comes in that very toxic relationship. So trigger warning if you don't like any kind of level of bully romance or toxic relationship, it can get quite dark. And there is also a darkness and a big secret around the love interest's sister who dies. So there's a whole kind of like spiral of dark emotions there. I did really enjoy it. I did enjoy it in the sense that it was really addictive, and the romance was actually really good. The steamy scenes as well were pretty damn good. So go into it with a bit of hesitation. I think like if you can overlook the embarrassing language and the cheesiness and the childishness, you might enjoy this book. I know a lot of people have really loved Punk 57, so you might end up really liking it. Now the next recommendation for me is the Brutal Birthright series by Sophie Lark. Oh, I think this is like my all-time favorite Mafia romance series. So this isn't as dark as some of the books I mentioned at the beginning, like Haunting Adeline and, you know, Still Beating. These books aren't that dark. They are Mafia romance, so things do happen that are maybe a bit questionable. These people are criminals, but basically it is about several different rival Mafia families in Chicago, and each book really takes one of them in turn and kind of matches them up and sees them have their happily ever after. So it starts with Brutal Prince, which is a forced/arranged marriage type of setup. Like, each book is very tropey, which I really like. The second book, which I can't remember what it's called, but that book is a kidnapping romance. And oh my God, I think that was my favorite of all the books I've read so far in the Brutal Birthright series. It wasn't done in a dark way, and I think this is why I like it, where, you know, this series isn't like really dark in terms of like assault or like anything very extreme, but it'll have like a kidnapping where, you know, like, of course that in its nature is quite dark, but like it's done for a purpose. Like, everything is done for a purpose, and the people, and they are actually all like treat each other really well. So I actually adore this series. If you are looking for some like great Mafia romance, then please do read the series. Sophie Lark really knows how to write books. Like, she is incredible. I've become a massive Sophie Lark fangirl now, so I do think it's really worth reading this series. If you haven't already, I talk about it all the time. Mafia romance is my new fave genre. Okay, so next up is my final recommendation, and this is the Captive Prince series by C.S. Pacat. Now, this is a dark fantasy romance in the sense of, this is a very kind of like, I guess like Greco-Roman inspired fantasy world where there are two warring nations, and basically, so the heir to the throne of one nation is betrayed by his brother to be king, and he gets sold into slavery to the leader of his enemy nation, and the leader of the enemy nation doesn't know this person's identity. He doesn't know that he is also connected to this other royal family in this rival country, and they grow together and they have the most beautiful relationship. Like, it is so just amazing. I love the romance in the series. So it is between these two men, and they are both like just so precious, and I love them so much. But caveat, and why I think it is a dark romance, is the nature of slavery in general. Damon, who is the kind of exiled prince from this other nation, is still sold into slavery, and he's still kind of treated pretty abhorrently, and that in its nature can be quite triggering. So, you know, just again, look up the warnings for all these books if it helps. I found a lot of the kind of more slavery parts quite difficult to read, but really it's like a great fantasy book series. Like, just the romance and the fact that it is a queer love story. Both of these characters, so Laurent is the king of this nation who then he buys Damon. Oh, both of them are just so good. Like, they're so different, and they really kind of learn to overcome their differences in the name of love. So I really would recommend this series if you want something that's like not too dark, but then still has an element of darkness to it. Also, if you want some fantasy, this probably is perfect for you. So guys, that is it for today's video on dark romance, a beginner's guide. I really hope you add some of these books to your TBR if you've not already heard of them, and do let me know down in the comments which dark romances you really would recommend. What I am after is like enemies to lovers, or kind of similar to that, like kind of like a arranged marriage type scenario, or like a kidnapping romance that isn't too dark. I think like my boundaries were basically like matched by Haunting Adeline, so I don't want anything darker than that series basically, but equally that was like the right type of darkness for me, I feel. So If you have any recommendations for me, leave them down below. I'm really excited to hear what you think about this video, and I'll see you very, very soon in my next one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.